What's up, everybody? Welcome to Cloud Storytime. I'm going to talk to you today about the project that I did to get promoted to Cloud Engineer. So this is back in 2017, 2018. I'm not a Cloud Engineer anymore. I am now a Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. But this project taught me a lot. It got me from sysadmin to Cloud Engineer. It was like a 30% salary increase. But I learned a lot from it, so I'm going to talk about it in this one. And I'll sort of like diagram it out and whatever. I don't know. We'll see how the final edit comes out. I'm also a little sick, so if my voice sounds weird, that's why. But yeah. Hi, I'm GPS and welcome to a new video. Alrighty, so I essentially built 3 different things. Initially, it was going to be just this process this one right here. I'm going to try to zoom in here and then we'll break it apart. I didn't add arrows. I was too lazy to do that. I'm sick, y'all. Give me a break. But anyway, yeah, I built 3 things out. And the thing we'll focus on first is this serverless XML file submission app. So out of this entire project, I was able to summarize it in sort of a way that if someone asks you, why does server raise? Usually you're talking these kinds of things to people who aren't like very technical or in the weeds of like the technical stuff that you're building. And this also is the case for interviews. Like people don't really necessarily care like, oh, I can program in 7 different programming languages. They want to know results, right? So when I was asked like, all right, why do you think you deserve a, promotion to cloud engineer? I could summarize this entire process of the things that I built is I took a process that was 18 hours of manual work each week. I should add here from 18 hours of weekly manual work to a monthly solution that costs $1. And I'll explain to y'all why this is, right? So anyway, by the time I was presented with this task to automate this process, I had done a bunch of automating things and sort of become known for the person on the inside who's able to automate just like our internal toolings and processes and things like that. I think at that point I've done probably like 2 or 3. And all of it was like worked with like Azure Logic Apps, Azure Functions, things like that. Because the way that this company was structured was they had a lot of legacy applications that they didn't necessarily want to modify or whatever it might be. But they had a lot of stuff that they wanted to add on. So this is where serverless shines. I mean, serverless is quite capable of being enterprise level applications from like end to end. But it also shines when you need to add features and you don't necessarily want to edit existing products. You want to just add to them. So that's why sort of using stuff like functions, stuff like logic apps was great for me because I could build my own solutions that would tie into the things that already existed. So that was like the perfect case for this. So anyway, they come up to me and like, hey, we have a team. We have these 2 people on this. They were like business analysts, I believe. They submit these files that one of our products, which will be this little VM here, one of our products generates these XML files. There were about, I think at that point, 50 to 60 files and growing because we had a bunch of clients. This was the energy sector. If y'all are not familiar with the energy sector, there's a lot of like APIs and websites out there that you have to work with, and they're not very updated, to put it in a nice term. Okay, so anyway, we have this product, and our product will generate these XML files, 50 to 60, and we have to submit this XML data to one of these energy related APIs, websites, whatever. We currently have 2 business analysts that spend their mornings about 2 to 3 hours each. So let's just say in an average 3 hours total. We could say 4, but I'm just going to say 3. And they do it Monday through, I think they were even doing Monday through Saturday. And they had to submit it before, I think it was like 9:59 a.m. Again, energy sector, weird rules, limitations, whatever. So what they would do is get the files. The product would generate the files, so they would download the files and then log into this website, which will be represented by this little thingy here. And each set of files had a set of credentials. So each file had a set of credentials. So it's not like, oh, I just go and upload all 50 files. Like, so no. Each file had a set of credentials. So you would grab your file, log into the website, And then you would upload the file, wait for a, file submitted correctly, then go out and then repeat the process 50 to 60 times. And growing, because as they would get more clients, they would have more files. Okay? So they told me, hey, we need to automate this process. That's pretty much it. Originally, it was just going to be this serverless XML file submission hub. But then it turned into me creating two sort of helper things that I felt would make everything a lot more easier. Even as I left. When I did end up leaving the company, I felt like I think this process should be able to still be maintained by someone else. So that's why I built these other two things. But we'll talk about that a little later. All right, so the most important thing I was trying to figure out was, does this website where we submit the data to have an API? Again, energy sector being very, very dated. I went to this website and they didn't have how some Twitter will have developer.twitter.com, stuff like that. They didn't have a developer portal or anything like that. I was like, okay, sucks. I did a little bit more researching and I found this really, really old PDF that had 300 pages, but there was 2 pages in that PDF that had, you can make these kinds of calls to this website. You'll have to submit for this kind of account, switch kind of account, get special access, blah, blah, blah. But once you have that, you can essentially use that a token to go ahead and submit data via an API. I was like, great. I don't care what we have to do in between. So all this, as long as I can have access to the API on this to upload the data, we're great, right? Fantastic. All right, cool. So step one was, again, this company I was working at having sort of legacy products that they didn't necessarily want to change unless they absolutely had to. I knew that they were saving these XML files somewhere anyway, so I was like, okay, it shouldn't be too big of a deal if I could get them to save it to blob storage, right? So that's why I have blob storage after here. So my boss, actually, who I was really, really cool with, was able to make that change. So every morning, I think it was around 8 in the morning. And again, remember, there was a time limitation. So all these files had to be submitted from before 9:59 a.m. And if it was submitted after, it would be considered data for the next day, and that was incorrect, right? So I think the website was it was expected that the website every morning had these files ready to go by 8 or 6 a.m., something like that, right? Anyway, so I got my boss to grab those files and also save them to blob storage. Fantastic. And I created a little folder in blob storage called to submit, and another folder was called submitted as an archive, because they wanted to also keep an archive of these files. They weren't massive, it was XML data, but anyway. So that was the first step, getting them to save that to blob storage. Fantastic. Then I had my trusty Azure Functions with a blob trigger. If you're not familiar with triggers when it comes to Azure Functions, a function will be triggered or executes depending on some kind of event. So your trigger is that type of event. In this case, it would be blob, which means whenever there's a change or a file upload to the blob container that you set your Azure function to listen to, this function will run. All right, so I was like, okay. So that first part, I was trying to figure it out. I was like, I can get that to work pretty easy. The next complication that I ran into was all right, so I know each file has a set of username and password that we have to use properly. But you don't want to have to manually tell which, you don't want to have a mapping scheme. A file is oh, when you see this file, use this set of credentials. No, because this is very error prone. Also, you don't necessarily want to have manual intervention unless you absolutely have to. So I talked to my boss and he was like, well, what if we develop sort of this naming convention from the file itself? Because I can get the files to be exported in a different kind of name, and then we'll just use the name of the file to tell it to where to grab, which set of credentials to grab. I was like, that's fantastic, because I can go to Key Vault, this little service right here. I can get my function to read the name of the file from the blob trigger, and then grab that name and say, okay, now go to Key Vault, find the credentials that we need in Key Vault, bring them back. Fantastic. We got the credentials, figured that out. Cool. Next, parse the XML data. I was using .NET. I'm a .NET developer. I know at times I was I'm learning Rust and stuff like that, but the language that I have the most experience in is .NET. C#, so I would call myself a .NET developer. So parsing XML data in any sort of language isn't really a big deal. So that was probably like the easiest part. So we grab the file, we have the set of credentials, we parse the data, and then we just make the call to the API. The API would return a response, which was fantastic. So then if there was a successful submission to the website here, so this is like that energy website, I would then have the function move the file from, remember I had like a to submit and submitted folders in my blob storage. So I would move the file from to submit to submitted, so it was archived. And then I would have the results saved to table storage as an output binding. In functions, you have this concept of bindings, input and output. So input would be information that you get into your function, and then this could be like Cosmos DB, blob storage, queue storage, a bunch of different services, and the same for output. What information do you want to save from the function somewhere else? So in my case, I wanted to save the message that the API returned, so the call, either successful or error. And I'll tell you why in a second. So yeah, this thing ran. This thing would run, and a lot of times, I'm just gonna say it's like 8 a.m. to like 10 to 9:59 a.m. With functions, we were using the consumption plan because the consumption plan is essentially where serverless functions shines. But the downside is you have cold starts on your first call, which can be a couple of minutes. With processes that, if you can deal with this isn't a big deal, then you can save a lot of money, right? So what a cold start is, like your first call is going to take a few minutes because your function is essentially off. But every call after that is essentially like within a few seconds. So if the first call was let's say we get all the files at 8, they get to blob storage at 8 in the morning, and they all hit. The first function, the first file processing would run maybe at like 8:05 or something like that. But then after that, everything just came off. So those 50, 60 files essentially by like 8:10, I don't know, max 8:15, let's say, we're done, completely processed. So this process, instead of taking, I average 3 hours every day, went down to taking something like 10 minutes, right? Cool, right? 10 minutes. And then we had the archive. It was archived in our Azure storage too. Fantastic. So we had an archive, we had the credentials in Key Vault, and then we had this table storage output information as well. So you may ask, why did I need that output? So the business analysts were used to getting that status message. Like they would upload the file on the website and then just wait for the status message. As long as it said okay, that was sort of their sign to be like, all right, now I can move on to the next file. So what I did was I saved everything in table storage. Once everything was completely, not once everything was completely done. So once it went to table storage, like the actual like column was there, the row of data was there. So I built a Blazor WebAssembly site, and that essentially, the backend was an Azure function actually. I forgot to add another Azure function here. So let me paste this in here, and I'll actually explain a little bit of how this works here. So let me move this here. Whoops. Anyway, so what the website was, this was like a Blazor frontend, Blazor WebAssembly frontend, and then it would call an HTTP Azure function, and that essentially would be like you'll go to like just like a URL, which would execute a function, and the function's job was to go get the results from table storage and just send them back to the website, and it would be just like a little table. And it would say the file name, and then the time it was submitted, and then the status, if it was okay or error. And if there were any errors, that would mean that, hey, either the password expired. It was usually just the password, the username expired. Because that was also a pain. Like, I think they had to reset these passwords every so often because, again, the energy sector, very tough on compliance and things like that. So that's what sort of brings me to this next tool, right? I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, that's just a static results page, just a static page with table data for each file, if it was submitted correctly or not. So then I was like, okay, we're going to need a way to deal with these credentials because I don't want to have to manually deal with it. And anyone shouldn't have to manually deal with any of that kind of stuff. So now I have Key Vault. Luckily, Azure has many SDKs, and each product has, I think most products have SDKs. And I could have easily built like a command line utility with .NET, but I wanted to challenge myself to try a different language, so I used Python. So I created a Python command line utility where it said, all right, give me the username of the password you want to update. Boom, grab the username. Okay, give me the new password. Boom, and then it would grab that, go to Key Vault, and update the value in Key Vault. And then that's it. And then the function was set to grab the latest version of whatever Key Vault entry it was. Back then, it was like you had to do like this sort of like workaround where you would just leave the ID of the Key Vault value in the function's configuration settings blank, and it would automatically pull the latest one. I don't know if they've changed it now. I haven't tried this lately. I should actually try recreating this project. I think it would be fun. But yeah, essentially I ended up building this command line utility where it's like, yeah, give me the name and I'll go update it. And then the function would always be up to date. I haven't talked to my boss my then boss. I should ask, hey, is this still running? But yeah, what's cool again, and when you go to talk about like, raises or interviews and things like that, people want numbers because it's a business, right? So if you tell them, I took a process that automates something that was 18 hours of manual labor of daily manual labor, not daily, goodness, weekly, monthly labor to something that runs for $1 a month. And the $1 was just storage. Because if you're on the consumption plan and you get a grant per subscription of 1 million free executions for Azure Functions, and this thing was running maybe tops like 60 times a day. So in a month, you're not going to get over 1 million. So it ran for free, the compute power. You obviously have to pay for storage, and then the archive stuff you had to pay for. But yeah, this is the project that did it for me. All right, so that was probably a long video, but I feel like I explained it well. I think I might try building this again, like maybe like a more concise version. But yeah, if you're especially in like an internal team that you work on internal tooling, you would be surprised with the amount of things that you can automate on the inside that will save people a lot of time. I feel like we're so focused on like a customer facing, like external facing, and we forget to realize that there are a lot of opportunities that will save time and money on the inside. So if you are in that space, look out for those opportunities. Yeah, because once I had this project under my belt, and it changed essentially the day-to-day of these two business analysts. Like they were able to be more productive and not have to do this mundane work. They were a lot happier. We became closer in terms of like colleagues. When I did the demo, like the showcase of the actual end result, how, I don't know if you know this, but in Azure, if in the Azure portal, when you can use like live metrics, and then it'll just like sort of output all the like whatever the function you set the output to be. And I remember running it, just running it, and then it just said file submitted, back to back like 60 times, and it ran like in a couple of seconds, really, everything processed. And then everyone was like, wow, that's like amazing. And I was like, I don't know, it was a good feeling to like present it in front of everyone. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.